All right, we're joined by a special guest, Burt Watson, the former UFC site coordinator, and of course has worn the promoter hat, has dabbled in the boxing world, which he originally came to through combat sports. Good friend of ours, visited the military. He is a former military. Uh, Burt Watson, man, the list goes on, but most importantly, you are a good friend to Junkie Nation. So thank you for joining us here on this interview.
Hey, without a doubt, George, man, I always appreciate you and Junkie Nation and your brother Goes and you guys inviting me in and staying in touch and staying with you guys and, kind of keeping up and keeping things relevant and keeping myself relevant with you guys. And I always appreciate the love, baby. Always.
Awesome. Well, before we get to some of the questions that I think definitely pertain to the relevancy you've had in combat sports, let me first ask you, how's your family? How are your friends? You live in a huge city that what we're hearing from, when I watch the news, obviously we know there's an epicenter in New York, but other big cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, on the East Coast, in the Midwest are starting to get hit hard. Update us, at least to your current circle and that city that you love, the city of brotherly love.
Well, being in Philadelphia, as I said, it's probably either the fourth or fifth largest city in the metropolitan United States. And I've lived in Philly most of my life, the majority of my life. And right now, it's very, very different. I've been out, of course, with a mask and kind of keeping my social distancing and kind of listening to the medical advisors, but everybody's listening, man. I mean, you go out there, people are legitimately, the roads are empty. You go to the areas where there's supermarkets and your pharmacies and things of essential need. People are listening to social distancing. They're staying away from each other, and everybody has on a mask, man. Everybody. And it's strange to see that, it's strange enough to see and know that that's where we are right now, but it's refreshing to see that everybody's listening and that everybody's paying attention to it and realizing that they have to listen and adhere to what we're being told to do for this pandemic to kind of subside and kind of die down a little bit until we get a vaccination for it. But it's very different. Philadelphia's always bustling. There's always somebody out on the street. There's always some kind of a concert going on. There's always guys in the park shooting hoops. The gyms are always open. You can always go in and out of any gym and it's always loaded and guys are in there working out and training, whether it's boxing or MMA. But people are listening, man, and it has changed. The climate has definitely changed. Even where I live up on the fourth floor and I look out the window and I can see the main highway and it's empty. There's no traffic, man, and that's a whole different feel. I've never seen Philadelphia like that before.
The kids, grandkids, everything's good. Your inner circle of friends.
Everybody, man, and I have yet to get any news of anybody whose family member or anybody that's been directly affected. But I reach out to my kids. My kids all live within a 3-hour drive from where I am, so I stay in touch with my kids. My 4 kids. I got 3 girls and a boy. My 5 grandchildren. I stay in touch with my grandchildren, and they're all fine. And I've even managed to stay in touch with my extended family, man, because working in MMA and as long as I've been in MMA, they're all my kids. They're all my children. And I've managed to, stay in touch with them. I've spoken to Henzo Gracie. I've communicated with Chuck Liddell. I kind of reached out to Ariel, Greg Jackson. And so I've communicated with my kids one way or another. This morning I kind of communicated with Lloyd Irvin. Of course, you text everybody. And for me, I got to text everybody to make sure that number I got is still good because I've had them numbers in my Rolodex for a long time. So, but I've been reaching out and texting people and just kind of making sure they're safe and everybody's safe and listening, man. and listening. For the most part, they're listening.
And those fighters still occasionally give little sound bites to remind us that you're always present. I heard John Jones saying, "This is what we do, why we do." When he was closing off with Dominic Reyes, you hear Max Holloway saying, reminding us to not leave it in those judges' hands, kind of using
Don't leave that SHIT to the judges, baby, because they will definitely make you cry.
Yeah, well, you're definitely missed. And so, Burt, in that role of babysitter to the stars, you know, being a site coordinator, you basically would coordinate everything behind the scenes with all of the athletes. You gave them anything they needed on fight week to make weight, and then to put on a great performance, on Saturday night or whatever night it was that they were fighting. It was about a 5-day process, like Tuesday to Saturday, maybe even more. And then you would pack up your tent, hop on a plane, and boom, do it all over again. I wanted to ask you, I thought you would be almost the best resource for something like this. What do you think of what you're hearing? Fight Island or seclusion in where they take over a hotel like at Tachi Palace in California. I'm sure you heard of that. Or maybe even if they do come back to the Apex Center. I want you to see if you can answer the question like this. Tell me the reasons why you think they can pull it off and what you think someone like you could do, to navigate all this. And then tell me the reasons why you think it's probably not a good idea, because I believe there's both.
Well, of course, there's both. There's both thought processes on both sides. There are those that thinks it should happen because they're not only avid UFC fans and MMA fans, but there are those that think it should be happening. And then there are fighters that financially can use the cash. But then you got those on the medical side that probably think that, it shouldn't happen because of the amount of people involved. But the time that I've spent with the UFC and being one of the creators of that system that they use and they work now and they still use it and it still works. One thing that I've always known is, number one, that the UFC always took care of the fighters medically. They always made sure the fighters were medically taken care of. So that's one issue aside that doesn't concern me, because I know that they take the time to medically clear fighters, whatever the case may be. And I've had some strange cases come up that fighters had medical issues and had to be medically cleared before they even stepped on the scale. And I know the process that they have in place and the people that they have in place doing that. I think one of the first things the UFC did was to hire a doctor on staff, to work with them, and they made that a consistency across the board. And the system that they have in place with the fighters and bringing them to the dressing rooms and setting them up in the dressing rooms and transporting them back and forth to the cage, I know that they're quite capable of making that happen and getting those fighters in and out the way they should do, no matter how much they have to scale down the size or the amount of fighters that they have. The system that they have in place is conducive to making that happen. Normally they don't stay too far away from the venue. So, bringing 2 and 3 fights in at a time and transporting those fighters in and out to making sure that there's a certain amount of people in terms of the production staff, even the production staff, the production end of it, they always had that system or created that system where whatever logistics they had to go through, and we went through some logistics, they were always prepared to move on to the next level. I remember a fight, and I don't remember exactly which one, but I know Randy Couture was on the card, and we had fighters in the cage, and the building went dark, completely went dark. And we had not only no electricity, but the truck went down, and we had to get the fighters out and get the fighters back to the dressing room. But when that happened, the UFC production and Dana White made sure that would never happen again. Mm-hmm. So things were put in place so that would never happen again. So, the majority of the things operationally that I know they need to make this happen and make it happen safely, I feel pretty secure that they will do those things. Transporting the fighters, setting them up in dressing rooms, the amount of fighters that are in a certain area at a certain time for distancing, and you know, you got fighters in the dressing room, you got fighters in the holding area, and you got fighters in the cage. You know, and they can set those situations up where they can make that happen. So I've never felt, when I heard that they were going ahead and making it happen from a safety and medical standpoint and an operational standpoint, I know what's in place, because I had a hand in creating that, and I know that it could work regardless of how many legs you had to pull off of it. They could make it happen. You know, but we're also in a time, in a situation where it is bigger than anything else that's going on. And the conditions of it, it kind of, you know, it designates what needs to be done. And it says that we need social distance. It says that medically we need to be careful. You know, and we've been in this situation now for, honestly, since the beginning of March. I'll say the end of February, beginning of March. And I think it's gotten to a place now where people have been careful enough now that they're more careful of spreading it, because they know that it's a situation that can be spread from one person to another. So people are being more careful. And I can guarantee you that you know, aside from maybe getting on a plane or flying someplace, but putting those guys in an area where they need to be secure, they're going to do that, and the fighters in the camps themselves will take heed to that. We're in a position now where it's not as rampant as it was before, and there's a little more of a control on it because of the social distancing and people listening to it. So I get a bit of a comfort level on that part. As far as what's going on with getting an island, and you know, Dana White foresees a lot of things, man. And I have yet to know that man to say something was going to happen and it didn't happen one way or another. And you know, quite a few times I've heard Dana say things that you're like, what the hell is he talking about? And you know what? From here to here, you understand it a little bit. And by the time you get from here to here, he has confined and refined and twisted it to a point where you understand it a little more and it makes more sense. So if that happens, which I'm sure some way it will, you know, I just, in my head, I'm thinking, you know, if it is, there is a place, you know, where the fans going to come from? How is that going to happen when we get to a place that we can have fans?
Excuse me. Mm-hmm. No, sorry, I just had to sneeze, but go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I did the dab.
There you go.
Yeah.
Never knew, did he? But you know, I mean, from the outside looking in, when you hear that those things are going to happen, of course you're going to be concerned and you're going to worry, you know, and you're going to think it's probably not the right thing to do. But as in anything, if you create a system that makes sure that you get from point A to Z, you know, safe and sound, and that you're healthy, and from a production standpoint and an operational standpoint, from my understanding, everybody's going to be tested. Everybody. And I'm sure they're already in the process of getting that done and having that done. And that's the most important part, is that everybody gets tested. You put that out there first, and once they know that everybody's tested, I'm sure it's going to happen. And I see right now they've got projected 249, maybe possibly for May 9th.
Yeah.
Which I think I see 12 projected fights.
Yeah.
You know, by the time they get to that, by the time they get to that, it may be 11. But I have no doubt that logistically, operationally, and from a production standpoint, and from a health safety standpoint, that they've got stuff in place, that they're definitely stuff in place to make that happen.
Okay, you've given me pretty convincing cases based on the history of you working, with Dana White and the UFC, and of course, you've done a lot of coordinating in boxing as well. You've even worn the promoter hat. So,
yes.
And another thing I picked up from you is whether it's Fight Island or them just focusing on Las Vegas, that'll be an advantage because less flying for the UFC staff and production. It's like once you're hunkered down in one of these cities, that's it. It's the fighters that'll be flying in and flying out. You didn't really give me a negative, and I'm not fishing for one. But was there any red flags that you thought of at all? Do you think the fighters would need to be held back after the fights, maybe for a week, to quarantine them afterwards, or maybe even when they get home, they got to make sure they self-quarantine before they hug their kids and their wives and their girlfriends, or like, have you thought that part out?
Well, what I do know is that medically, once you get tested for the virus, that they're actually going to be tested again before the fight's over. And I understand that there may be a little bit of a lag time before they go home, a couple of days or so before they go home. But whatever the case is, I am 100% sure that they have put some thought process into it. Initially, when I heard that they were going to go on with April 18th, and this was probably around April 5th or so, or that, there was not a full red flag, a little bit of a red flag, because at that time I knew that the pandemic and the spread of it and how you caught it, and nobody was listening, or nobody knew how to listen, or nobody understood how to listen, or nobody took seriously the seriousness of this situation. So when I heard that they were going to go on with that on April 18th, and knew that this was somebody had just punched somebody in the mouth, okay, and nobody waited for that guy to get up. I knew that they were still down and they were still drowsy. That gave me a little bit of a red flag. But then as we went on, and I saw that from a federal standpoint and from a medical standpoint, they had things in place that we needed to listen to that took some of those concerns away or addressed some of those concerns, then I started listening a little more. And I think they started listening a little more, because then they yanked the 18th off the table. But as they yanked the 18th off the table, things behind us were progressively getting a little bit more understanding, and we're beginning to control things a little better. We got two things going on here.
Yeah.
There's a need to listen medically and understand it, and know that this thing has no eyes, no ears, and no fears. But at the same time, I know that people are struggling financially. That people are struggling to pay the next mortgage, or where the next paycheck is coming from, and people want to get back to work. And I said struggling before I said getting back to work, because to me, the struggle is stronger than just wanting to get back to work, or just wanting to get out of the house because you're stuck in the house for 20 or 30 days, which people are not used to doing. But the struggle is real, and people need to get back to work and have a source of income, but they need to do it safely. And I'm very secure that the UFC and other organizations, because other organizations will follow the lead of the UFC, just like everybody followed the lead of the MMA, of the NBA. The NBA was the first to say, you know what, we're shutting this down.
Yeah.
And it became a domino effect. And the UFC, everyone in MMA and most promoters follow that lead. You got the UFC, you got Bellator, you got PFL. They're all listening and talking, and are going to follow the same lead. For the smaller promoters or even guys that are that are just starting to try to get into that promotion end of it. You can't survive off doing an event with no fans, because that's how you make your money, and that's how that is total the success of your event. Whereas on a larger scale, such as UFC and Bellator and PFL, those guys have large television contracts and sponsorships deals in place that will take the financial brunt of no fans and paying the fighters. But the regional promoters and so forth still got a long ways to go with that.
So let me ask you this, Burt. Dana has said that any employee that doesn't feel comfortable at partaking, whether it's his production team, his PR team, the fighters themselves, whoever, he won't hold it against them. It's only if you want to be there. If you were still with the UFC, being that you're over 50, and we know that from 50 to the older ages, chances increase, of susceptibility or just harsher results, as I shall put it. What do you think you would have done? Is this something you still would have said, "No, put me in, coach. I'm staying. I'm doing my job, and I want to be a part of getting this thing going. And even though there's risks, is that something that you think you would have ran towards, or do you think, you would have pulled back and let the pandemic come through and then rejoin, when it was safer to do so?"
Well, first of all, I would have wanted to get tested. I would have made sure that I got tested and that there was testing in place. Not only when I went over there, but when I came back, and I'd also want to secure and make sure that everyone else that was going was tested, everyone. And that's something that you have to take the word from the administrators, and most of the executives, that we are testing everyone. And I'm sure that they are testing everyone, because people are looking, and the media is looking and listening, and they're looking for somebody that goes over there and is not tested, or participates in the event that's not tested. So that's the first thing that I would have wanted to do, was to make sure that I was safe and I was tested. And once I knew that, I would definitely want to go, because I also feel very strong in the fact that those fighters and all those camp members are my kids. Nobody takes care of them the way that I do. Mm-hmm. So I would have wanted to make sure that I did that, and I was there to make sure that they did the right things. Whatever was put in place that's supposedly the right thing for them to do, I would have wanted to make sure that I was there so that they followed those rules and that they did those things.
And you want to know what I want?
What's that, baby?
I want either President Trump to create a sports pandemic crisis team, we'll call it, or maybe Dana and Scott Coker, they create an MMA, or maybe we get other promoters from boxing, a combat sports pandemic crisis team. I think it's great that we have all these different men and women like yourself that can present and add and contribute and look at all the different angles, so that when this comes back, because combat sports will come back before team sports. It's a one-on-one thing, The same goes for golf and possibly tennis and maybe even NASCAR. I don't know. But there are going to be some sports that come back sooner. But, boy, I'd love to see someone like you contributing, on conference calls or just being there and being a part of something like that. They're creating a crisis team for when they restart the economy, and they're saying, correct, the experts are saying, hey, look, we need to have economists and people from healthcare to be a part of that. You know what I mean? And so if we create a sports in general one, or a combat sports in general one, I'd love to see someone like you partake in that. You know what I mean? Because, man, what you just said, I think, is going to carry a long way when a lot of people, hear this, because you did it for so long, and, not just again in MMA, but in boxing as well. So it kind of makes me quell my fears a little bit, like calm down a little bit, because I've started to turn the tide, Burt. I definitely wanted to adhere to, May 1st is what they were saying, right, on a national scale. And then this state, Nevada, got an A grade. We're doing good. The governor here said May 1st as well. So I'm adhering to that. But I also understand that at some point we have to start looking to make the comeback as well. I want to do it safely. I don't want to get hit with a second wave of the Rona.
Well, what you don't want to do is get hit with a sucker punch. And
Yeah.
that's what we did. We got hit with a sucker punch. And when you get hit with a sucker punch, you got to get up and you got to listen to your team. You got to listen to your team members, because you know what? I went out there and I did something that I wasn't listening, and I got cracked. I got popped. But I can tell you, and I don't know, or I haven't heard this for sure, but I can guarantee you that medically, from a commission standpoint, from a promoter standpoint, first of all, probably the commission, they will be prepared for anything like this that happens again, because this was a sucker punch and it caught everybody off guard. It's like, in the military, after World War I, we were prepared for World War II. When Vietnam came along, we were prepared for that. Afghanistan, Iraq, we were prepared for it. But the first one, we weren't. And, not to be cliche, but this is a war. And it's a war that we have to rally our troops and get our armies together. And you don't just go at trying to get through it. You go at where it originally started, where that punch first came from, baby. That's where you go, and that's where you start. And I can guarantee you from this point on, from a standpoint of our sport stopping and not being able to go on to the next level, they will be prepared for this to even get close to happening again. I can guarantee you. And MMA is going to be the first, because May 9th is going to be the first major sport that's probably going to proceed from a standpoint of television production and continuing on with no fans. But it's going to be the first sport to do that. But this happens again, I can guarantee you, they'll be ready. Promoters will be ready.
Hey, just to be clear, then you're willing to answer that phone in case they really do create the sports pandemic crisis team or the combat sports pandemic crisis team?
Without a doubt.
Good.
Without a doubt, I would.
I think commissions, like the big commissions that are going to huddle up, and once they do it, like Nevada and Ohio and California, then I think there'll be a trickle. But I'd love for them to hear your input. You know what I mean? Because that's that trenches stuff that you did for so long.
And you got to really care. You got not only care, but you got to know. You got to know that fighters, especially when they go on site to fight, that's all they care. That's all they care about is the training and the fighting, and then getting their check. Okay, but when they're focused like that, somebody has to lay those tracks and make sure they stay on those tracks and that they go down the right direction. Somebody has to lay those tracks for them. And, that is the job initially from the commission to the promoters to the organizers and the operational team and those things, to lay those tracks. That all the fighters got to do is get on those tracks and go straight to that cage or that ring and perform. And when they come out, those tracks are going to be laid for them to get back to wherever they came from safely.
Before we wrap up, can you update us? Will you be promoting again in 2020 if this thing comes and goes, like let's say by summertime? You plan on wearing that hat again? And what else do you have going on?
Well, right now that's what I'm looking to do, is to continue with that, because it is if not logistically for me, I have to be, because of what I do, I have to be hired by someone, and someone has to have a need for me. I just recently did a bare knuckle event on March 7th in Fort Lauderdale for BYB, and it was 2 days before the pandemic hit. The show was March 7th. They must have had maybe 1,500 people in there. I left there March 8th. All hell broke loose March 10th and 11th. But I was just under the wire. But someone has to have a need to hire me for me to do that. But promoting, and I'm not looking to compete on any level with anybody. But I know what I'm doing. It is what I do. I know how to do it. I know what fighters to go at, through getting the right matchmaker, and how to make an event happen that fighters want to come back and do that event again. It's what I do. And the one way for me to continue that and keep my hands on all of it is the promotional aspect of it. So I'm gonna stick with that as much as I can. And at this point in my career, unless I'm doing, if I was still with the UFC or working with the UFC, then that would be a different story. But right now, where I am right now, I want to continue that. But still, if somebody has a need and is getting ready to promote an event and needs somebody to walk them through it, I'm available. They can call me or you, baby.
All right. I'll field the calls, tell you which ones are the good ones and the bad ones, and then I'll send the good ones to you.
I'm good with that.
Burt, thank you so much, man, for doing this catch-up interview. It's been a minute since we caught up, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad to see you healthy, and I'm glad to hear about everyone in your inner circle being good. So anyway, what I don't want to do is take too long before we catch up again. So let's catch up, sooner rather than later, and see
Absolutely.
where we're at. I think this summer is going to be really, really amped up with combat sports one way or another. I see it coming.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and MMA is going to be at the forefront of all sports. Actually, just kind of getting back to where we need to be. But it also needs people like you and Goes and MMA Junkie to help put it out there so people can hear it and listen to it. Because right now, everybody needs guidance, baby. And whatever information you can give, I used to tell the fighters, if it's up here, I want it right here, baby. If it's in here, I want it right here. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask, baby.
That's what's up. All right, Burt. Well, enjoy your afternoon. Great catching up with you.
Hey, thank you so much, man. Always a pleasure. Much love to you and bruh.
All right.
MMA Junkie Nation forever, baby.
That's what's up. Take care, Burt.
All right, baby. Peace.